We'll take a tea break and come back here after 20 minutes at 11 o'clock.
Oh, this is the right place. Okay.
Just 1 minute.
The many people will come.
I think I have been indicated.
That's okay. That's okay. For example, someone.
Welcome back. Our next speaker is Professor S. Ramanan, adjunct professor at Chennai Mathematical Institute. He doesn't require any introduction at all. He's world famous for his work in algebraic geometry and differential geometry. I should say a few words about him nevertheless. He received his PhD from Tata Institute, where he worked under Professor M.S. Narasimhan. He received several honors for his contribution in algebraic geometry and differential geometry, topology. I shall mention some of them. He received the Bhatnagar Prize in 1979. He received the 3rd World Academy of Science Prize for Mathematics in 2001 and the Ramanujan Medal. He was also an invited speaker at the Helsinki ICM. Today he will speak on concept of moduli. Let us now invite Professor Ramanan to give his talk.
So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be giving this lecture here on this special occasion. I chose this topic because in post-independence India, while there were many individual mathematicians who were doing very well, a group of mathematicians making a mark in a certain field, that was in the Tata Institute. And we were very lucky in finding a niche for ourselves in the topic which I am going to cover. So I thought, so we were very lucky in the sense that we were there when the subject started, and I'll also mention some of the initial contributions. And so it was, so whenever moduli of vector bundles, for example, is mentioned, the Tata Institute contribution is definitely one of the, even if I say so, it's one of the fundamental inputs. So I've tried to keep the subject somewhat non-technical, but non-technical is not a, technical is not a definite, it doesn't have a definition. So it depends on the individual, it's subjective. So I hope I can give some flavor of what we did over the years. So whenever we have some similar objects, mathematical in this case, but we would like to classify them. So what does classification mean? You have another set which you perhaps know well, and then you want to put a bijection between the kind of objects that you want to consider with that object. So we have a feeling that we understand those objects better by making these bijective correspondence. So we'll start with some simple example. So take the circle group S1. These complex numbers of modulus 1. So any continuous representation of S1 is I think it's echoing too much. So any continuous representation is a directional representations. Each one of them is one-dimensional, and these are called characters. One-dimensional representation of S1 are called characters. and we would like to therefore classify all characters on S1. So these are all maps from S1 to S1, which are homomorphisms, and they can be classified. Any character is of the form z going to z power r for some integer r, positive or negative. In other words, there is a natural bijection. This r gives you to every character, you associate the corresponding r. So you get a bijection between the set of integers and the set of characters. Okay, these are all the characters and every character. So there is a bijection between integers and the set of integers and the set of characters. There is more to this correspondence because you can multiply two characters. So characters from a group. On the other hand, we know integers from a group and addition. And this above correspondence respects this. That means when you multiply two characters, the corresponding things, corresponding integers get added, because one of them is z to z power r, the other is z to z power s. When you multiply it to z to the r plus s, and therefore it is this bijection respects the two group structures. So when you classify by a set, and very often you put an extra structure in the set which reflects the properties of the objects you are considering. Okay. So, but then again a very simple example, there can be more complicated structures on the classifying set. So let me give you another example. Suppose we want to take not S1, which is an abelian group, which is take any other group, any non-abelian group, for example. Suppose, and also you take representations which are direct sums of irreducible representations. And there are many groups for which, if you restrict the representation suitably, it is indeed true that every representation is a direct sum of irreducible representation. For example, for finite groups, for compact groups, and reductive groups, and so on and so forth. There are many groups for which it is true that if you take suitable representations, those are all direct sum of irreducible representations, and therefore you may try to classify irreducible representations. For example, I will give you one example. I am not going to use it, but if you take the unitary group, all irreducible representations can be similarly classified. In the one case, that is S1 is U1, so there is only one integer. Now there will be a sequence of integers with M1 greater than M2 greater than Mn. So this sequence of integers will give you all representations, all irreducible representations. There is a canonical bijection between these two. Canonical, well. But it's not always a good idea to stop at irreducible representations, although every representation can be obtained as a direct sum in this case. Because as we say, multiply characters, you can multiply representations. That is, you can take the tensor product of two irreducible representations, but then the tensor product is not irreducible. Therefore, when you want to classify, and if you want to keep the additional structures in mind, it is not always good to take irreducible representations. So I want to give you one complicated example of the structure that you will have on the set which classifies the representations. So I will give you, towards the end of the lecture, perhaps I will return to this, but at this point I just want to say that I want to indicate that sometimes you have to put not just a group structure or something, but something more complicated in the set which classifies the kind of objects we want to study. Suppose you take all finite dimensional vector spaces with a G action, that's a representation of G. They form an abelian category. That is, homomorphisms have an abelian structure, you can compose, and so on and so forth. And the tensor product is also an object in this category, because if you take two representations, you can take tensor and there is a natural G action on the tensor product. It's called a tensor product representation. So when you forget the action, you get the usual category of vector spaces where you can add, you can multiply, you can tensor, you can take the direct sum, and homomorphisms have a Abelian structure and so on. Such a category is called you can formalize all these properties and call it a Tanakian category, because Tanaka was a Japanese mathematician who studied representations of reductive groups and or compact groups actually, and noticed that this kind of structure is useful in the study of representations. For example, if G is a reductive group, I don't say what it is, for example, GLN-C is a reductive group. We can break SLN-C, the special linear group, is another reductive group. If the G is reductive, suppose you give this category, then from this category you can get back your group. And therefore it gives, this structure has enough substance in it to get the group structure itself. So I will hopefully come back to this aspect towards the end, but I do not want to get into the details of this right at the moment, at this point. I will give you another example of things which you may want to classify. This is what are called elliptic curves. An elliptic curve is a quotient of the complex numbers by a lattice. So if you take complex numbers, after all it's basically as a real vector space is simply R2. So take R2 and then take a lattice there and take the quotient. Then as far as the real vector space is concerned, it's simply R by a lattice, and therefore it is simply S1 cross S1, it is a torus. But with a complex structure, in this case we have C, and we have a map, covering map from C into this torus, and therefore it gives a complex structure on the quotient. For example, a meromorphic function there is, when you compose from the natural map from C into the torus, that should be meromorphic. So you can talk about meromorphic functions, locally you can talk about holomorphic functions, so it's a complex manifold. So we can classify all elliptic curves as follows. You take the upper half plane, the Poincare half plane it is called, that is take Z such that the imaginary Z is positive, that is you take the complex plane, take the real line and then take only those points which are strictly on the upper half. Suppose tau is a point on the upper half plane, that is imaginary tau is positive. Then to that you associate the lattice, integral multiple of tau plus an integer. So this forms a lattice. So take this lattice and take the quotient. So what I have done, I have done to every point of the upper half plane, I have associated a lattice, therefore an elliptic curve. Because I remember an elliptic curve is the quotient of C by this lattice. So it's a complex manifold of dimension 1, and I have associated to every point of the upper half plane an elliptic curve. But then two different points of the upper half plane may give isomorphic elliptic curves. That means the lattice, for example, can be a multiple of another lattice, and then the quotients are not very different. And therefore, if you want to see all the isomorphism class of elliptic curves, you have to study when two different points of the upper half plane give rise to the same elliptic curve or to isomorphic elliptic curves, and that can be done. In fact, if tau and tau prime are related by this equation, A tau plus B, tau prime is A tau plus B over C tau plus D, where A, B, C, D is a matrix, integral matrix of determinant 1. Then the corresponding elliptic curves are the same. So let's take the upper half plane, make the group SL2Z, that is integral matrix is determinant 1, act on it, and pass to the quotient. Say 2 points are equivalent if they go by a transformation of this kind. And then this will classify all elliptic curves up to isomorphism. So under the above action, the quotient of H, so we are interested in taking the upper half plane, make SL2Z operate on that and pass to the quotient because we want to know all elliptic curves. So all elliptic curves are in bijection, naturally bijection with the upper half plane modulo SL2Z for the SL2Z action. The action is to take 2 points, tau goes to A tau plus B over C tau plus D, where A, B, C, D is an integral matrix with determinant 1. Now it so happens that if we take the quotient of H, the upper half plane by SL2Z, you can actually check that it is isomorphic to C itself, the complex plane itself. That is, I can give a function on H into C, which is surjective, and 2 points go to the same point in Z, if in C, if and only if they go by an element of SL2Z. Therefore, actually, all elliptic curves are classified very simply by C itself. Okay? So you can call it the modulus of the elliptic curve. Okay? So corresponding to every complex number, there is an elliptic curve, and this is a bijection, and I have told you how it is done. And look at this map, take the corresponding point, any point in the upper half plane, and then correspondingly you take tau Z plus Z, that lattice, and take C modulo tau Z plus Z, and then you get an elliptic curve. So corresponding to every complex number, you get an elliptic curve, and this gives a bijection. So we have satisfactorily classified all elliptic curves, and this is called you may call this a modulus of the elliptic curve. So suppose we take a surface, although I've been talking about elliptic curve, it's actually a surface, right? So it's complex, from the complex point of view it's a curve, from the real point of view it's a surface. So take a Riemann surface, and associated to it is there is a genus, which is a positive non-negative integer, and that's called the genus of the Riemann surface. For example, if it can be described in terms of the fundamental group is generated by 2G. If G is the genus, it is generated, you can use this as a definition. 2G, it is generated by 2G elements, and you can write down what is the relation. So this it is generated by IIBI. The presentation is, it is generated by IIBI with this relationship, the relation among the generators. Now take all such surfaces of genus G, and you can ask in the same way, take isomorphism classes of coupled Riemann surfaces of a given genus G, and then ask whether you can classify them by some object, and which somehow resolves or which has a structure which is induced from this set of Riemann surfaces. And that can be done. So that the structure we have in mind is a complex structure. So you can associate to every genus G, as I say, every non-negative integer, this space which classifies all Riemann surfaces of genus G. They are all topologically the same, as I said in the case of C. It's simply CG modulo, R2G modulo a lattice, but so it's also a torus. But then the complex structures vary, and therefore the set of all complex structures on that can be described by a complex space. By the way, another meaning for the genus G is the set of all holomorphic differentials on the Riemann surface G. You take that, and that's a vector space, take the dimension of that vector space, that's genus. So this is the analytic point of view, and the topological point of view I have given there upstairs. Ellipticals, which we studied earlier, it corresponds to genus G equals 1. So, we associated a modulus to every elliptical. So, you can ask whether we can give moduli for every compact Riemann surface, and if so, how many moduli are required. Okay. So, in other words, we want to give a few complex numbers and then say corresponding to every complex number there is a Riemann surface and there is only one. We would like to say it, if it is possible. Now, the set of all complex structures is in bijection with a space of dimension 3G minus 3. This doesn't work out for G equals 1, as you can see. If you put G equals 1, you get 0. But then for G greater than or equal to 2, it's correct. So, I have to be precise, I should say for G greater than or equal to 2, this is true. This space has the structure of a quasi-projective variety. You can say what's the structure? It's a quasi-projective variety. That means you take a projective space, take a variety given by algebraic equations, take a subvariety given by algebraic equations, take the complement. So, there are some exceptions in that projective variety. So, it can be described as an open set in a projective variety. So, that is the moduli space. We call it a moduli space because this describes the moduli. And however, it is not a manifold, it has singularities. So, every point is like a domain in CG, a neighborhood, which is CG, a domain in 3G minus 3, moduli a finite group. So, it's called an orbifold. So, and the similar points, you see when you put the structure, when all points are not similar, so you take some special points which are singular points of this moduli space, then it has a meaning. The compact Riemann surface corresponding to that has a meaning. For example, if you take a singular point, the corresponding Riemann surface has automorphisms. If you take a general Riemann surface, it doesn't have automorphisms if G is greater than or equal to 3. And so it is, and so those Riemann surfaces which do have non-trivial automorphisms correspond to singular points in this curve. And as I said, the finite group is simply the group of automorphisms of that Riemann surface. The tangent space to the, so we would like to know if it's a manifold, if it's a good point, at a smooth point say, then the tangent space is dual to the vector space of quadratic differentials on the space X. And the space MG is, so you study the space and you would like to know more about the space to get to know more about this moduli, and it is connected, and in fact it's irreducible. And these are interesting results because if you know some result which is some property of a Riemann surface you want to prove, and then if you know it, you give one Riemann surface, maybe the property is open, that is if it is true for a Riemann surface, it is also true for neighboring Riemann surfaces, and therefore this will show if it is irreducible that this open set is dense in the whole space. So almost every Riemann surface will be of that kind. So it's a very useful result. So as I said, the question is, as in the case of ellipticals, can we also give at least some exceptions, that is you omit a few points in the Riemann surface or even a subvariety in the MG. This MG is the space which parameterizes all compact Riemann surfaces. Maybe there are some exceptional things, so a lower dimensional variety, you forget about it, you take the complement, and then can it be put in one-on correspondence with C3G minus 3, maybe there are some exceptions there also. You take some subvariety given by algebraic equations. So by and large, can you put MG and give some moduli in 3G minus 3. So 3G, in 3G minus 3 there will be an open set, big open set, which will be isomorphic to a big open set in your MG. So then you can say these are the moduli of the curve, right? It will be 3G minus 3 moduli. So only in the 20th century, this was done for small genera, 3, 4 and so on. So we can ask also a simpler question. If we are not able to solve this, we can say at least in CG 3G minus 3, I give an open set. Corresponding with that, I should get every Riemann surface or almost every Riemann surface. So at least I can do, given any point of say 3G minus 3, maybe with some exceptions, given by some subvarieties, can we correspondingly give a Riemann surface of dimension of genus G, and we should cover almost all Riemann surfaces. This is called the rationality question. And Harris and Mumford in the 60s, I believe, proved that even this weaker requirement, that's why I dumbed down the question, even the weaker requirement cannot be met if G is large. So as I said, low genus 4, 5, 6 were being done, and then they proved that if G is greater than 24, then that does not exist. You cannot parameterize it by C3G minus 3. All Riemann surfaces cannot be parameterized by C3G minus 3. This was a surprising result at that time. And they assumed it was hard, and you know how, just I mentioned this here to say how improvements are made little by little. And Harris and Mumford, Heisenberg and Harris proved it for all genus, or even for G greater than or equal to 24, but this negative result, that there is no such parameterization possible. No algebraic parameterization by C3G minus 3. On the positive side, things are improving for from genus 6, 7 and so on. So finally it came up to 13, but seems to be still an open problem, what happens in the intermediate ranges. But however, once you have a negative result for last G, this becomes slightly less interesting. So now I want to give another question, another moduli problem in which we have been interested, as I said in the beginning. So if we fix a Riemann surface, now I am not going to vary the Riemann surface for some time. So fix a Riemann surface of genus G, study metamorphifications on those, that's why you look at the Riemann surface, and you want to do complex analysis on the Riemann surface, and then when you do this, it leads to the study of what are called line bundles on X. I will explain what line bundles are in a moment. But a holomorphic section of the line bundle is a metamorphification with zeros and multiplicities controlled by the data. So you take some points, finitely many points on the Riemann surface, and give them multiplicities, positive or negative, and you try to find functions, metamorphic functions, which have at most those many poles and at least these many zeros and things like this. And this can be described as a section of a line bundle on the Riemann surface. Therefore, line bundles are very interesting from the algebraic, analytic, geometric point of view. So line bundles, now you can ask for, given the Riemann surface, take the set of all line bundles, whether you can classify them. You can ask the question. Okay. First of all, it can be classified. It has been classified since Jacobi, way in the 19th century. So this, first of all, it is classified by a discrete parameter, which is the degree of the line bundle. And as I said, if we take multiplicities, and take all the multiplicities, take the sum of zeros minus the number of poles, and that will give you a degree, and that can be defined as the property of the invariant of the line bundle. And for each degree, suppose you fix the degree, then it is described by a variety called Jacobian, which is again the quotient of CG, G-dimensional affine space, by a lattice. So it's also a torus. So actually I have said what is the vector space corresponding to X. You can take the holomorphic differentials. That's why I mentioned what they are. That I said is G-dimensional. So G-dimensional vector space. And take those which when you integrate over loops, you get integers. Only take those and then take the quotient. That's a lattice, and you can pass to the quotient. So all this was proved by, essentially proved by Jacobi. Even then you can ask at this point, you can take any CG, after all I did C at the modular lattice, you can take any CG modular lattice which has occurred naturally in this case. So you can take any CG and take a modular lattice, and that's a compact manifold, in fact a torus. But it is not a projective variety in general. If it is, it's called an abelian variety. Riemann showed in the middle of the 19th century that the Jacobian which we have constructed here, in this way, starting with the Riemann surface, that is an abelian variety, that is actually a projective variety. In general, if you take any CG and take a lattice, and the quotient is a complex manifold, is a nice thing, but it is not an abelian variety in general. But abelian varieties, the complex tori which arise this way, these are all abelian varieties. Now I said line bundle, and I postponed saying what's the line bundle. You can take a family of vector spaces parameterized by the curve. So you think of, you have the Riemann surface, and for every point of the Riemann surface, you think of a vector space sticking out like this, growing out of that, and the union of all those vector spaces has a nice structure, and locally it does not change, but globally, because of the topology of the Riemann surface, it may change. So such a thing is called a vector bundle. And the line bundle is a vector bundle of rank 1. That's at every point you have a one-dimensional vector space, but this one-dimensional vector space is only locally a product, and globally it is not. So all linear algebraic constructions that you do can be imitated for vector bundles, because you can, as I have already remarked, you can add two vector spaces, take the direct sum, you can take the tensor product of two vector spaces, you can take the symmetric algebra, you can take the exterior algebra, you can do what you want, and at every point T, you have a vector space, you have another vector bundle, you have another vector space, you can take the tensor and take the union. So you can put a structure of tensor product, direct sum, everything, whatever you do in linear algebra, you can try to imitate. And I often say the theory of vector bundles is simply linear algebra with a parameter. The parameter can be differentiable, it can be complex, it can be algebraic, and so on. So the algebraic geometers look at the algebraic case. So the Riemann surface is one of the cases. So for example, if you want lambda r v, we can take union of lambda r of v t, t in x. In particular, if v is rank r, as you know, the rth extended power is one-dimensional, so you get a line bundle, and the line bundle has a degree, and we call it the degree of the vector bundle. So next question is whether all vector bundles can also be so classified, and to take a curve and take all vector bundles on that, and they can we put a structure on that. Then Mumford, when he studied geometrically the quotients of varieties by groups, he said that it is not possible, and he found out, it was known that such a question does not have a positive answer, as in the case of line bundles. You fix a rank, you also fix a degree, and then you can ask whether you can put a structure of say algebraic variety or complex manifold, whatever you want. You can ask the question, after it's only a question, whether you can put a structure. And Mumford answered that it's not possible. And he, as I said, that was known, that it is not possible. But what he did was to give a condition on the vector bundle, a fairly general condition of stability, and if you confine yourself only to stable bundles, you can indeed construct such a variety, and it is dimension, I have written m squared there, r squared times g minus 1 plus 1. So next question is, just as you have done in the other cases, whether you can give an explicit description of these varieties. So as I said, we were first in the line, therefore we could prove initial results. So for r equals 2, for example, the results, initial results were that the space SU2B, that means you fix the determinant to be of degree d, and you fix the determinant, and then you take all vector bundles of rank 2 whose determinant is fixed, and it's fixed to be d. Then if d is even, we prove that this space is only just P3 in the case of genus 2, and it's intersection of two quadrics in P5 if d is odd, and it's a quartic hypersurface in P7 if d is even for genus 3, and so on. So initial results came out of us. And subsequently, for example, if the curve is in general for genus greater than 2, as I said, in this case genus is 2, if x is hyperelliptic, then SUD can be given an explicit description in terms of intersection of two quadrics. Now it is in P2G plus 1. In G equals 2, it is P5, which I have given as bullet 2 here. So now for every curve we have a space SURD. This builds a fiber space for every Riemann surface. You have SURD and then put it there and then get a fiber space over MG. And you can ask how it varies and so on. You can ask various questions about that. And on SURD there are line bundles, and in fact all line bundles on SURD can be classified by Z again. And then you can ask what are the sections on SURD. So sections are usually denoted gamma. So gamma SURD L power R. L is that basic line bundle, and every other line bundle is the power of L. So you can ask for that space. What is the dimension? And when you take the projective bundle corresponding to that, it's a projective bundle on Mg, and Hitchin proved that there is a natural flat connection on this projective bundle, which essentially means, which more or less means that this vector space does not vary. I have said it's a flat connection. If you have a flat connection, more or less the bundle is trivial. So this space has an independent existence, independent of the complex structure. Okay, the significance comes here. At this point, it was one of the amazing things in my career as a mathematician, that we did it without any thought of physics. Okay, and we did two things. One, we did National and I also did some connections, universal connections and so on and so forth. That's incidental, nothing to do with this. And again, we had no clue of physics. And suddenly, gauge theorists made use of it. And again, here there is another case. Not only they used the results, but they came up with something which we couldn't prove, which we had no idea how to go about. They gave a formula for the dimension of this space. Dimension of what space? You have, to every Riemann surface, you have SURD. As the Riemann surface varies, this builds a bundle over the moduli space of curves. And so these fibers, that is SURD, has a line bundle L, and take L power R and take sections. So take what is the dimension of the space of sections. Whenever you have a projective variety, you always ask the question whether we can find sections of gamma L power R, whether what is the dimension. That's the first question you ask. And we had no clue except for dimension L and L square. We had no idea how to go about it. Even today, the geometric aspect of how it embeds and what are the equations which vanish on that is not known. Maybe some physicist will tell us. And this is known as the Verlinde formula. And these are also called, the space itself is called conformal block of a certain kind. Conformal blocks are slightly more general. And they gave a formula for that also. So it took quite a few years for mathematicians to prove that the formula was correct. And it's a very complicated formula. And now finally I want to talk about another physics input into this area, which is called the Higgs bundle. And you take a Higgs bundle is a vector bundle together with a section of some associated bundle. As I said, to E, you can associate various other bundles, symmetric algebra, exterior algebra, and so on. So you can take NE, for example, take NE and tensor the bundle of differentials line bundle and take a section of that. And that's called a Higgs field. At least that's what we call the Higgs field. So you take the vector bundle together with a Higgs field. The set of all pairs, which are again, you have to restrict yourself to what are called stable Higgs. So if you take, I have said set of all Higgs, I should change it to stable Higgs of fixed rank and degree B can be given a space, again a quasi-projective variety, which is of dimension exactly twice the dimension of the moduli space. And that's not an accident. If you take the quaternion space of any variety, it's going to have twice the dimension, and the quaternion space can be identified with gamma NE tensor K, and therefore if you take the modular space of vector bundles and take the quaternion space, that's contained in this Higgs modular space, and in fact as a dense open set, it's a Zariski open set in the Higgs modular space. So I will skip this because I and I want to go back a little bit, and you have the fundamental group, as I said, of the Riemann surface, whose structure is very well known, and you take unitary representations. Any unitary representation of the fundamental group gives a vector bundle. In fact, any representation gives a vector bundle. Any unitary representation gives a vector bundle. And one of the fundamental theorems of Nassim and Seshadri, which started the whole subject in the modern era, is that this sets up the bijection between a set of equivalence classes of unitary r-dimensional representations of pi and the moduli space of vector bundles of rank R and degree 0 on X. Okay, as I said, any representation gives a vector bundle, and they prove that this gives a stable bundle if the representation is irreducible, and they gave a bijection. So direct sum of representations give rise to direct sum of the associated bundles. Tensor product gives rise to a tensor product of vector bundles. So in other words, the whole Tanaka category, as I said, direct sum and the tensor products can be formalized. The Tanaka category of representation of the fundamental group can be identified with the Tanaka category of these bundles. But the key point is that if you take, so from our point of view, the significant thing is these are far-reaching generalizations by Hitchin, Donaldson. It gives, now you took unitary representations, corresponding to unitary representations, you get vector bundles. And now if you take just a representation into GLM, then it gives a vector bundle together with a Higgs field. This is a non-trivial construction. It's able to solve with some differential equations on the Riemann surface. And this gives a correspondence, a bijective correspondence between reductive representations of the fundamental group on the one hand and Higgs bundles on the other, Higgs pairs. That is bundled together with a Higgs field. So this gives a complete bijection. This was proved by Hitchin and Donaldson. And so, in fact, if you do it for all dimensions and so on, there is a Tanaka category here, there is a Tanaka category here. These are complete equivalents. So that's what they proved. And that's a very significant result because Riemann surfaces are algebraic. The vector bundles that we study are algebraic. The variety of algebraic meaning, these are algebraic varieties. And then the moduli space of Higgs bundles, the Higgs moduli, is also an algebraic space. On the other hand, this Tanaka category, I said that more or less your group can be obtained from the Tanaka category. So since you use these equivalents and know that the representations of the fundamental group, you may not be able to get the fundamental group, you at least get the representations of the fundamental group with all the structure that is necessary to get back, if not the fundamental group, at least the reductive computation of that. So this was a very significant step because there have been many attempts to get back the fundamental group from purely algebraic concentrations. Fundamental group is a highly transcendental construction. You have to go to real substrata in order to the topological, it's a topological construct. So it is difficult to get it out of algebra. So this says purely from algebraic geometry, you can get back, if not the fundamental group, but almost all the properties of the fundamental group. And Grothendieck had done that, what's called a pro-finite completion. This has much more structure, pro-reductive completion, and so on and so forth. So this is a very significant result. No, I meant Hitchin and Donaldson. Dimension of the vector bundle. Where?
Do you mean
Yeah, representations of dimension R.
on a curve? You're still working on a curve?
Yes, yes, I am. Yes. It's completely on a curve. Yeah, as he mentions that, as you can see, this has been generalized because it's very significant to get the fundamental group out of the algebraic structure. Therefore, you study it on other higher dimensions and so on and so forth. And that Simpson comes in. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
I guess I have two questions about possible generalizations. So, all this was for Riemann surfaces, if I
Yes, I stuck to Riemann surfaces.
Riemann surfaces, so they're only sort of half the two-dimensional manifolds. The other half are non-orientable. So I'm wondering, the closed two-dimensional manifolds, I'm wondering if there's any generalizations of this that handle the non-orientable case.
Yes, there were some students who talked to me at Cambridge earlier this year, and we were working on that, but what results they have achieved, I don't know. I'll go back and find out. I don't remember their names, but yeah. I think maybe they are students of Hitchin, I don't know. We'll find, yeah.
And the second question is about higher dimension. Is there some, I mean, you quoted a theorem that the irreducible representations correspond to the vector bundles, distinct vector bundles.
Irreducible representations correspond to vector bundles together with the Higgs field.
Oh, together with the Higgs field.
Yes, and the higher dimensions for the Higgs field, it's not just a section of any tensor K, but you have to have some integrability condition for that field, which is always satisfied for Riemann surfaces. Did I make myself clear? For Riemann surfaces, you take.
Pardon?
It was
was hard to hear because there was feedback. Could you please say it again?
Yeah. In the case of a Riemann surface, you take a vector bundle together with a Higgs box such things, and that forms the Tanaka category. And then, as I said, you can try to get the fundamental group, and the theorem is valid in that case also.
The theorem is completely general then? For
It is general. It is general.
closed manifold?
It is general if with this with these coda. I mean, whatever to say, these restrictions.
Because I'm thinking it might have some applications to defining different kinds of statistics, particle statistics.
Yeah, I'm never.
Like boson
I never cease to be
permeates.
surprised. So, yes. And also I must say this Higgs field, again, we had no clue that this is going to be applied somewhere for the doing everything over the integers. You can do algebraic geometry over C, you can do over any other field, you can do even over integers and so on. Doing this, the so-called the fundamental lemma, which gave the Fields model to the to the mathematicians who use that. They have used this Higgs moduli over integers, number fields, and so on and so forth, and have got non-trivial results in arithmetic. So
is it the same Higgs of physics fields?
same guy, it's the same field,
Higgs field.
Higgs field. But, yeah,
Very general question.
yeah.
The only time I heard about the elliptic curve was in some popular article, and Fermat's last theorem was used, was proved. He said that elliptic curves are extensively used, the ideas.
Yes.
So can you elaborate some of your structures just from Fermat's last theorem? It will be easy to understand.
I'm afraid I have to plead ignorance. Yeah.
Can I ask, again related to this question, conformal blocks are related to mapping class groups of the Riemann circles. So these turn up, if you try to do quantum gravity, in a strong way, is related to this issue of break groups in statistics. So one question that arises is, typically when we do quantum field theory, we have to find out, we have elliptic operators, and we have to find domains and sections of these bundles. And the question arises whether the mapping class group which acts on the base can be lifted to the domain of the operator, which are sections. If they are not, then there is a problem in formulating quantum gravity. Are there any related results that you know?
No, nothing which I can. Yeah, I know vaguely what you're talking about. I have
For example,
talked to
what
people.
is the relation of the mapping class group of the base to the results you are finding? It's coming from that Faraday formula, no? Which is related to the conformal blocks.
I have no idea. But there are some things which I would like to talk to you about now that, we know the language. I would like to know, for example, if you take a line bundle L, that line bundle which I talked about, you have gamma L. And you have, actually I am asking you a question, I am not answering you a question. On the other hand, you have gamma, and you have gamma L square, that's another linear dimension, right? And you have a natural map from the second symmetric power, that's quadratic things, on gamma L to gamma L square, right? If you take two sections, you can multiply, you will get gamma L square. So you have a map from S2 of gamma L to gamma L square. And it can be proved that it's surjective. So the question is, what is the kernel? So you know the dimension, this dimension, you know the kernel, right? So in general, do you know that, this gives actually geometric information about this variety embedded in projective space. What are the defining equations? I would like to know whether quadratic equations are enough. So So we will, that is in other words, as I explained here, the physicists could succeed because the dimensions are independent of the curve, and in fact even the vector space is independent of the curve. And therefore one can ask whether I give you only a surface without any complex structure, can you give me this vector space? Okay, and they could, and that's how Verlander gave the dimension. So I would like to see not only the dimension, but I would like to see the geometry also, where the physicists can give some input in this. It will be interesting. See, as you can see, I am an algebraic geometer. I am trying to see what I can get out of physics. And I am not conversant with physics enough to be able to contribute. Okay.
Any further questions or comments? If not, let us thank.